Welcome back to Parking Live, the podcast where we explore people, policies, and technologies that are shaping the future of curbside management and parking operations. I'm Jade Neville. I've spent most of my career working across the UK and Europe, partnering with councils, operators, and on-street teams to improve how parking policies are delivered.
And I'm Matt Darst. Before moving to the private sector, I managed parking for the city of Chicago. And since I've worked with cities like Indianapolis, Oakland, Los Angeles, and DC, applying data science to rethink and optimize operations. And one thing I've learned through these engagements is you can't optimize performance until you look out for the people doing the work. Safety isn't just a policy choice. It's a prerequisite for consistency, professionalism, and ultimately better outcomes for the public.
I couldn't agree more, and that brings us nicely to today's conversation. Today we're joined by Adam Isen, Director of ParkIndy, someone who's taken the issue of frontline safety and built one of the most thoughtful, structured, and technology-enabled models in the industry. That robust safety foundation has enabled the program to improve operational performance.
Exactly, and Adam will walk us through ParkIndy's structured training, their use of body cameras, and engagement protocols, as well as the work they've done to improve compliance and reduce congestion to make Indianapolis' streets safer.
So, Adam, welcome to Parking Live. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jade.
De-escalation is at the core of the ParkIndy training. What's prompted the adoption of the control the interaction and not the person philosophy?
What we've seen is that most of the established framework was geared towards law enforcement. Our program is private and our team does not have the ability to compel action in the public like a sworn-in law enforcement officer could. The public has a healthy respect for someone in uniform. As our enforcement, we need to assess the situation, use words and actions to help achieve the best possible outcome, which is, of course, not to escalate the situation. We need to issue the ticket, keep it pretty low key, and then, vacate the area as quickly as possible and move on to the next function.
Can you walk us through how this philosophy is reinforced across your teams from training through to daily operations?
Yes. At new hire, we go right into training. We start with role playing and recommended responses. We give out a bunch of information to the new hire. We do one-on-ones, then we do shadowing, and then within usually under 2 weeks, that resource is out enforcing parking enforcement. We have added body cameras, and the enforcement records challenging situations that can get flagged for categorization later, for review or supervisor one-on-ones, and to figure out the best way they could have handled the situation, or maybe just kudos to how they did a great job handling that escalated situation. All that provides sort of the continuum, right? The life cycle of how to address this, continuation of training, and we try to keep that going, of course, within our day-to-day interactions.
I love that, how that's it's ever evolving, and there's an element of self-reflection in every one of those cases where something could either be one enforced as you've done really well here in terms of a behavior, or it could be actually let's have a look about how we can do this slightly differently to improve the outcome.
Yeah, the role-playing function in and of itself is kind of cool too. That seems unique. Something else that I think is rather unique about parking enforcement in Indianapolis is your use of body cameras that you noted. How have those cameras changed how your teams interact with the public, and have they helped with how you follow up on investigations?
Yes, immensely. The body cameras have empowered enforcement, and they've removed some of the write-ups and but I did do it correctly, but it becomes hearsay, right? The cameras that allow that impartial recording of what interacted between them and the other person, right? The footage really has helped, I think, just reduce the number of altercations in the field. Based upon what we've seen over the years, we've been doing this, ParkIndy's been doing this for 15 years. We see about 40% reduction since we've added the cameras over the last couple of years in interactions. I think the public seeing it seems to de-escalate the situation a little bit.
I mean, that is massive. 40% reduction in negative interactions, I guess you would call it, with the public. Are there other lessons that you've learned from the use of body cameras in terms of improving training or accountability in the field?
Yeah, we've learned a lot of lessons from the cameras. We kind of went in maybe not thinking how much it would disrupt, right, some of our practices, but it really did, for the better, of course. We realized that that our enforcement vents a little bit as they leave each situation. The under breath comments, the little snapbacks that, I think people say they have to kind of keep that in check, right? Otherwise, when we're replaying the video at a later date, you hear all these unprofessional comments.
Right.
We also realized once we started getting the video footage, we really rely heavily on that video footage. So if we don't have video and a complaint reaches, a higher level administrator manager, we start feeling less confident in reinforcing our team, even though of course we want the solidarity, but we want to be impartial and we want to be fair to the public whenever we can. Of course, we tend to side with the public, so the video footage kind of helps in that determination. So not having the video footage is detrimental to now how we run our operation. Interestingly enough, we've come to rely so heavily on the video footage that we hadn't addressed a policy of a requirement to leave our office having a working camera. We had some cameras go down recently, and we realized, gosh, we don't have enough backups. So we didn't want to suspend enforcement, of course, not having a camera, so our policies didn't address that. So we reworked our relationship with that vendor on the camera side, and I have enough cameras coming for every person, every shift, and backups, because we're relying so much now on the cameras.
Adam, in the UK, our officers use cameras as well on some of our on-street operations, and they've been quite useful when it comes to pursuing prosecutions for assaults on officers. Is that something that you utilise the cameras for at ParkIndy as well? Have you used those as evidence-gathering devices to help prosecute those who have assaulted officers?
Only from usually a criminal law perspective, like we had a physical altercation and then we offer up the footage to law enforcement with that particular filing of that police report. Through the civil side of that, somebody's just what we call contesting a parking ticket. I don't think the administrative law judge has ever requested a copy of the camera footage. They could, and the citizen could ask for it. But usually when somebody's contesting a ticket, it's about the logistics of whether or not they deserve the ticket, and the camera footage doesn't do much. I mean, we take digital images, minimum of 3 for every parking ticket. So there's usually adequate support for that particular parking fine. An unintended use of the camera footage, about 1.5 years ago, police approached us to get footage off of one of our body cameras because there was a theft in process on a block that we were enforcing, and they were able to get some supporting evidence off of our body camera, what was happening in the background. So that was an interesting situation I never would have thought of when we had the cameras, but it was useful.
Yeah, when it comes to prosecutions from a criminal perspective, I suppose the body language aspect of the interaction, that helps quite a lot, having that video evidence when it comes to making a statement against a criminal offence towards an officer. You've got that evidence there on that body cam footage to help prosecute that criminal offence as an assault, which has been a very vital part in the application of body-worn cameras in the UK for sure, as well as it being a visual deterrent. As you say, people see that you're wearing them and start wondering what's being recorded and start checking their own behaviour because they don't want to be seen to be doing something untoward on camera. Can you tell us a bit about the ACT model, the assess, connect, transition, and how do those steps translate into a structured de-escalation path? Because de-escalation is quite a key element to this, isn't it? It's trying to prevent an actual assault from happening. So can you explain that process a little bit more?
So the acronym was really created at our enforcement level. Our enforcement project manager, William Dugan, he has been in the industry for like 20 years, and he wanted to take some of his training in critical decision making and kind of crunch it down to our our needs. So he shortened it to just the acronym ACT, for assess, connect, and transition. We needed something pretty simple, easy to digest for new hires. Like I said, they get out on the street pretty quickly in our operation. And we wanted it to be sort of non-law enforcement geared, but also just to really give them something quick that they could learn and utilize in their day-to-day enforcement. It's a pretty straightforward concept for really safety and disengagement, and we've seen a lot of success implementing it.
Just to that point about the camera footage being used as evidence for other crimes, it just goes to show how much parking enforcement officers are providing a public service, aren't they? They're doing so much more than managing parking restrictions. They're a tourist information point. They're a question to ask us if you're lost. There's so much more. They definitely do a public service, and it's great to highlight those additional things that happen, the benefits that happen just by having them on the street. So that's really handy.
ParkIndy maintains really kind of a large ledger of policies and supporting materials for training their parking enforcement officers, or your parking ambassadors, if you will. One of the things I always found challenging when I was on the government side was taking that material and really translating it into action. And I'm just wondering, what challenges do you face when you're encouraging PEOs, parking enforcement officers, to walk away from a situation that might be escalating? And how do you get them to understand that their safety is really primary and the parking ticket is secondary?
It's a good question. Parking, it's important, as we all know. And the enforcement, the compliance is, our job. But, our enforcement, I think sometimes they get blinders on, right? Like they're out there and they're doing a great job and they're thinking about it from their right and they're enforcing the rules. And when they run into that interaction, it's a knee-jerk response to verbally defend themselves. And then a lot of times to be pulled into that argument of justification. We try to train them to not respond back, to just issue the ticket, smile, and move on to the next ticket or the next function of their shift. And we don't want them to be pulled into that argument. They don't need to justify their actions. They're enforcing the ordinance, they're writing the parking ticket, and they're moving on. We give them tools to kind of help transition that. If they do get stuck, we have sort of a generic business card with a number to call a supervisor, a voice interactive system to, they can terminate to sort of a general customer service number. And that, little tools like that, we give them. Somebody approaches them, hey, call my supervisor, and they can move on. But the whole point is to train them not to feel the need to justify their actions, to not interact. From once somebody is agitated, right? We want to be sort of that ambassador where we can and give that helpful information if somebody asks, hey, where do I need to go to find this particular place? But once the interaction turns negative, we want them to get out of the area as quickly as possible.
The business card idea is kind of neat, right? It serves not only a customer service function, but it sounds like it's enabling a bit of deflection, right? To really kind of calm a situation down. That's a neat idea.
Yeah, it's almost like offering something to the motorist, isn't it? That as a kind of like a breaker of the tension. I'm not completely unable to help you. Here is something where you can seek help. And that helps with that de-escalation, doesn't it? In terms of that, the emotional element of, I want an answer now, which is a majority of where these kind of interactions come from when they get in a bit hot under the collar. It's another good element to realize as well, and another good thing to highlight, I think, that our officers are people behind the uniform, and there's much more than a uniform and a presence. So I'm interested to understand, Adam, how does ParkIndy support officers after an incident, both legally and emotionally? What's being done to help them out?
Yeah, that's a good point, Jade. Every one of our team, they're out enforcing, just doing their job. They're trying to live their life, right? And it's a tough job, right? And when we run into a situation where there's an interaction out in the field, We have protocols like they need to report it to the supervisor. The supervisor will make the determination of what level of incident that might have been and whether they need to take a break, come into the office for some decompression, review the situation, maybe just some downtime, right, to get their bearings so they can go back out and enforce. We do support and encourage the filing of a police report. One of the, unique aspects of what we do, we're privatized enforcement, but operating under sort of the umbrella of ordinance. So, we don't have police powers. If parking enforcement, if our team gets into some sort of situation that requires the involvement of law enforcement, they have to file that as sort of a private citizen. And then there's follow-up, with that process and a police report, an interview, sometimes a court appearance. And we support all of that. Do it on, while you're on the clock, do it during your shift, schedule the follow-up interview with the police the next day on the, while you're back to work. And if there's court, again, that would be, we support that within the daily work hours and on the clock. And we also support police. So if they come to us, we give them information, body camera footage, and any other information to help with those reports.
Just a quick follow-up question on that. Do the officers, as part of their training, get support when it comes to statement writing? Is there part of the training process which helps support officers on writing statement for incidents, so making sure that all the correct information's gathered and it's being set out in the most efficient way?
I guess it depends on the situation. If they're filing a police report on the scene, we're not really there to sort of help with that. We do require write-ups, and a lot of times that write-up by that parking enforcement staff will be reviewed, and we might kind of help them make some corrections to that write-up, which sometimes does turn into a report to police.
It is a common problem that I feel is maybe getting worse. This idea of threats and assaults increasing against parking enforcement officers, regardless whether or not they work for a private entity or a parking authority or a city. And I'm wondering, for someone who is looking for new ideas on how to promote safety with their enforcement teams, what are your from the hip suggestions that you would offer them?
I think it's always good to start and sort of review the challenging points. The technology for us of adding the body cameras, it started right at the tail end of COVID, where we piloted the body cameras. People were so standoffish, and then their feathers were ruffled that we were even writing parking tickets, that the rate of incident just jumped up significantly. And that's when we started piloting the body cameras, which now turned into just part of our everyday operation. Any tools to de-escalate the situation, I think the more they're grounded in technology, the better they can be monitored and implemented within the organization policies, and you can layer practices around it. So to kind of answer your question, I think really just look at what technology's on the market. There's somebody probably using it, and maybe not in parking enforcement. Law enforcement could be one area, private operators on, parking lots could be another. Those things, I think, could become investigations to figure out what you can incorporate into your operation.
Kind of a follow-up on that. I know a little bit about your background and your service in the military, and I would imagine that you would probably say, and correct me if I'm wrong, that processes and procedures are as important to ensuring the safety of teams on the street and frontline operators as technology. Is that a fair statement, or am I getting that wrong?
No, you're right, Matt. The safety protocols and the processes that we implement are there for the benefit of safety of our field resources. We could be maintenance, could be, of course, in this regard, we're talking about parking enforcement, could be our supervisors, out monitoring the routes. But those procedures and protocols, where some entities can get too steeped in processes and protocols, they're there. They need to be simplified. I believe they need to be reviewed routinely, maybe yearly, every so often, especially when you add in new technology. If you can simplify them, I think that is more beneficial, but they still have to be very effective and monitored to the needs of what you're running into out there.
So I guess that would be kind of one of the opportunities that come through the role playing that you do with your teams is you are perhaps removing intuition from the decision-making process and instead are likely underscoring the need for repetition in a very structured way to ensure safety. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you put it very eloquently. Yeah, the role play and review, I think, allows for that repetition, for it to become a response that's almost not even thought of. We want safety of our team first. The parking tickets can be second, even though, that's a core function of their job, not at the risk of their safety. And to be able to de-escalate and vacate the area, I think, is much more important than any one parking ticket, right? So yes, that repetition, it just becomes sort of a daily, weekly meeting and review. And I've been in a couple of those, it's just sort of cheeky and down to earth, but it's producing the patterns that you're mentioning.
Well, this has been really insightful, Adam, and we thank you for joining us. I think the work that you're doing in Indianapolis with ParkIndy is a really important example of what cities can do, not just to keep officers safe, but for really treating enforcement as a profession that's grounded in empathy and respect. And so I want to thank you for sharing your time and your team's approach with us today.
Definitely. Thanks, Adam. And this is it's a great reminder that behind every citation, is a human interaction, and behind every uniform, there's a person who deserves to feel safe. So, thank you very much for sharing all your learnings and all the things that you've implemented at ParkIndy and in Indianapolis. I'm so keen to share this with the audience, especially the UK audience as well, because there's definitely things that happen on both sides of the Atlantic that we can take from each other's processes that can help further support officers in their line of work, a very important line of work as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jade.